Today I'm going to talk about the problem with plastic. I'm sure you remember in 1967 in the film The Graduate, Mr. Maguire was giving some advice to Benjamin Braddock, and he said, "The future is plastics." And boy was he right. Maguire was right. Look at the amount of plastics that have been produced since that time. The 1950s was when it really took off, and then it just accelerated in its exponential growth since then. So what is plastic? Plastic is a man-made material that may be molded and formed into solid objects. It is crafted from long chains of molecules known as polymers. Plastics can bend and exchange form without breaking easily. They are very flexible and may be molded into many forms and merchandise. And we've seen that, the proliferation of plastic in virtually everything we do, we now encounter plastic. So the process of making plastic is fairly simple. We start with crude oil, we refine it, we crack it, we polymerize it, and then we produce a variety of different products. So it's a fairly simple process, but it's man-made and it's synthetic. If we look at the history of the Earth has been around 4.6 billion years, and during that time we've gone through different stages. These are the stages in the life of the Earth, and the most recent one, the Pleistocene, we are now in that, but we're about to enter a new age. During those 4.6 billion years there have been many, actually 5 mass extinction events. The latest one being only 66 million years ago. That's a short time in the life of the Earth, but that was the mass extinction event which wiped out the dinosaurs. Possibly an asteroid collision, we're not sure, we don't remember what happened then, but the reality is that we're now entering a new age, and it's called the Pleistocene era, and it could be the first and last mass extinction event on Earth because it was created by a single living species, the Homo sapiens. We have created this plastic monster, and the plastic monster is destroying the Earth. Because plastic is a poison like no other, because plastic doesn't biodegrade, it's not naturally found in nature, and what it does is when it is disposed of in nature, it can actually kill things. Obviously we've seen lots of examples, whales being beached full of plastic. We've got sea turtles that are caught in fishing nets. So we are really impacting the environment in many, many ways, and none of them good. There's a seabird full of plastic. There's a beach full of plastic. If you look at the location of plastic pollution in the oceans, the North Pacific has this most large 199 billion tons of plastic pollution. Indian Ocean 13,000, the Mediterranean 2.47 billion, and the North Atlantic 930 billion. A lot of tons of plastic, and it's getting worse every year. Now I'd like to talk about the 7 types of plastic, their toxicity, and what they're most commonly used for. There are 7 types of plastic, and the first one is called PET or PETE, or polyethylene tetraphthalate, and that basically is the most commonly used plastic in the world, and it is used in a whole different variety of different things, from soda bottles to bottled water to anything that you can put into a container. The plastic container is most likely to be made of PET or PETE. But the problem with PET is that it can leach antimony, a known carcinogen. Number 2 is the plastic known as HDPE, high-density polyethylene, and this is used in a wide variety of different products, but it can leach chemicals that through into the hormone system and into your body, and the result is it has a negative impact on your body. If you're drinking things that were contained in these bottles, then the bottles have chemicals that can leach into the liquids that you're drinking or the liquids that you're using in your daily life. Plastic number 3 is the most hazardous form of plastic. It's called PVC, polyvinyl chloride. We use this in a lot of plumbing pipes, in a lot of house construction. It's the most hazardous type of plastic. It's called the poison plastic. It contains known toxins such as BPAs, phthalates, lead, mercury, and many other poisons. Number 4 is low-density polyethylene, and this is used in plastic bags, grocery bags, and it's very prevalent in society, low-density polyethylene. All these plastics have the recycle badge on them, but in reality very, very few are actually recycled. LDPE is one of the safer plastics, but it still contains chemicals that can leach into the body, disrupt the hormone system, and change organic cells within the human body. Number 5 is polypropylene, and that's a harder plastic. It's considered safer than many other forms of plastic, but it can still leach chemicals that can disrupt the hormone system and change organic cells in the body. So it doesn't seem to matter what type of plastic it is, they've all got chemicals, additives that have been put into them to make them create the kind of plastic that we need to use, but the problem is the additives are toxic. Polystyrene is probably one of the most deadly forms of plastic because it is known to leach many toxins, many of which cause cancer and damage the central nervous system. So you do not want to be consuming anything that has been stored or heated in polystyrene. And plastic number 7 is called other, and this is the catch-all that we use for all other types of plastics, such as things like water bottles that are refillable. This is a harder type of plastic, typically known as ABS. ABS is the material that Lego blocks are made out of. And I just heard a staggering statistic that a manufacturer of Lego blocks can produce 4.9 million Lego blocks per hour, and they're producing them round the clock, 24/7. And that's just one factory producing Legos. And if you think about how many Lego blocks are out there, they've been producing them since 1950, and I don't think anyone has ever thrown any away because we just keep accumulating more and more. But the problem is that is a legacy that we're going to hand down to our future generations. So a good question comes up: how long does it take plastic to decompose if it's buried in the earth? Well, plastic does not biodegrade, it just breaks apart. And when it breaks apart, it creates what we call microplastics. The microplastic contains millions of nanoplastics, and nanoplastics are the most deadly form of plastic. And unfortunately, they are invisible and you cannot test for them in your drinking water supply. Some toxic plastics last hundreds of years. Examples there are diapers, medical devices, styrofoam, all the things that are polluting the environment. And a lot of them contain PFAS. PFASs are called forever chemicals, potentially fatal artificial substances. If you breathe them, it could damage your health. Used in many everyday products since 1950. Examples are Teflon, Gore-Tex, firefighting foam. We're only just recently discovering that all the firefighting foam we've been using has actually created a toxic environment for the firefighters, and that is really serious. Teflon, of course, non-stick cooking pans, when they are used, when you heat plastic, it leaches chemicals into whatever you're making. Gore-Tex, the clothing that we wear when we go outside, Gore-Tex is containing plastic, and that rubs off on your skin. If you wash it in the washing machine, that plastic dust gets into the atmosphere and distributed throughout your house. Exposure to any of these causes cancer. So we need to avoid exposure. Chemicals in plastics. You start off with plastics and they break down into microplastics, becoming nanoplastics, and nanoplastics can get absorbed into the bloodstream. And there you see the number of plastics that we're dealing with. The number of hazardous chemicals involved in those plastics. I said there were 7 types of plastic, but there are over 13,000 chemicals used in the processing of and production of plastics. And any one of those chemicals could be deadly as a toxin. If we talk about how we manage our plastic waste, it's not a question of recycling, because the amount of recycling in America is very, very little. If you look at those various countries, Africa, Asia, Europe, the reality is that most of the waste is produced in the industrial world, developed countries such as America, Europe, and we are then exporting our plastic trash all over the world, except the problem is the rest of the world doesn't want it anymore. If you look at the plastic recycling rate in the US, it's less than 5%. And one of the reasons is that you have to separate the plastic out into its various types, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But the other thing is, if that plastic has been contaminated with any type of food waste, it cannot be recycled. So it is a massive effort to recycle, and the recycling effort costs money. You have to employ people to separate out the various types of plastic. And the problem is that it's cheaper to buy new plastic than it is to buy recycled plastic. And as a result of that, there's a vested interest in a lot of oil companies and plastic companies and chemical companies in producing new plastics so that they can be sold for a profit, because they don't have to worry about who disposes of it, because that's up to the consumer. That's not their problem. The consumer has to deal with all that plastic waste. They make a good effort of putting it in the recycle bins, but once those recycle bins are picked up, who knows where they go and who knows what happens to them, and they probably end up in a landfill, or they could end up in the river, they could end up in the ocean. And you cannot drive down a highway in America without seeing mountains of trash all alongside the highway, where people have had fast food, convenience food, and just toss the containers out the window with no regard to the environment or how many hundreds of years that will last polluting the environment. The top 10 countries with the highest plastic pollution, this was in 2021, and what happened there was, you can see the Philippines is the big leader, but it wasn't the Philippines creating all that plastic rubbish, it was the rest of the world exporting it to the Philippines before they clamped down and said they didn't want to take it anymore. Because the reality is they were getting overwhelmed with all the world's trash. So what are we going to do about it? The United Nations has spent 6 years developing something called the Global Plastic Treaty. And this was going to be the great white hope. This was going to give us a future for this planet that we could believe in and leave the planet in a better condition than we found it. So here was the plan. 2022, they were going to come up with a plan, they were going to start developing the plan, and by 2025 there's going to be a diplomatic conference and agreement to move forward on the Global Plastic Treaty. So leaders from all the industrial countries and all the island nations and Africa all got together, United Nations in Geneva, and they sat down, they talked about the Global Plastics Treaty, and this was the result. The result was a complete failure. Why? No countries signed the completed plastic treaty. None of them. Even though over 100 countries, including Europe, Canada, Australia, many African and island nations, they supported ambitious measures like placing a cap on plastic production. But countries such as Saudi Arabia, Russia and the United States resisted these limits, favoring a focus on waste management instead. And as we can see, those countries have a vested interest in exporting oil, crude oil, which is the basic raw material of plastic. They want to keep on doing that. They want to keep on making their money, and they want to keep on putting the onus back on the consumer to fix the problems that they have created. Plastics do not biodegrade. They simply break down and become microplastics, and microplastics exist forever. Microplastics, you can actually see them. They're less than 5 millimeters in size. They would fit on your fingertips like that. You could see them clearly. But the problem is not just the microplastics. The problem is that macroplastics become mesoplastics. Mesoplastics are about 1 millimeter in size, but they break down to microplastics. And microplastics become nanoplastics, and they're thinner than a human hair, of the magnitude of a DNA gene in your cell or a virus. Those are at the nano level. So that is where the impact is most. And most nanoplastics are not detectable. And microplastics have been found in newborn babies in higher concentrations than in adults. So where do the babies get them from? They get them from their mothers during pregnancy, because whatever the mother is consuming will end up in the baby. Microplastics can enter the brain within 2 hours of being consumed by drinking water. That's a rapid time frame, only 2 hours to get microplastics into your brain. And on average, most people in America are consuming 5 grams of plastic every week. So that's equivalent to a credit card. Imagine eating 52 credit cards in a year. That's what we are consuming in America. Microplastic pollution in the brain shows 50% more plastic today than 8 years ago. So nanoplastics are tiny, tiny particles, only detectable with a scanning electron microscope, but they're tiny, but they have a huge impact. Microplastics and nanoplastics are in everything around us. In the ground, in the soil where we plant our seeds, in the air we breathe, in the water we drink, in our homes, in our food, the things that we touch, the clothes that we wear, the products that we use. They're in our bodies, in our organs. Every single organ of the body contains some level of plastic, and they are in our lives forever. Nanoplastics are small enough to permeate through biological membranes and have been found in every organ of a human being. Nanoplastics contain toxic chemicals which can cause cancer. And when those microplastics are in the ocean, then they get dispersed within the wildlife that is existing in our ocean. 71% of the Earth's surface is water, and most of that water is now contaminated with plastics. Everything from the things that we throw away, the things that are in the air, the chemicals that we dispose of, they are all ending up in the ocean. They're washed down through rivers, and rivers vent to the sea. But there's something that occurs in the ocean which is called marine snow. And marine snow is nature's way of recycling debris. So if you imagine a fish dies and floats on top of the surface, but gradually over a period of time the body disintegrates and the smaller particles end up becoming like snow in the ocean. So they're just very fine particles that are drifting downward under the process of gravity, and they end up on the sea floor. And what that means is that the ocean is now being contaminated. Marine snow is being contaminated with plastics. And at the lowest level, right on the sea floor, that's where the plankton exists. And the plankton consume the plastic. They get embedded with plastic and they get consumed up the food chain. And as they do, all the fish that eat the plankton are now also contaminated with plastic. And what that means is that the level of plastic could bioaccumulate in that process. So there's going to be higher and higher concentrations the bigger the predator, the bigger the animal in the food chain. So wastewater treatment plants do not remove microplastics and nanoplastics from the water. So that is a problem. A recent study of 12 patients who died from dementia and Alzheimer's showed 10 times more plastic in these people than people with healthy brains. And if you look at a liter bottle of water, that bottle contains 240,000 nanoplastic particles. Imagine if you drank 1 liter of bottle of water a day, how many nanoplastic particles would end up in your body, and how many of those would get stuck in your body because they wouldn't get washed out. So what can we do? Don't buy anything that is wrapped in plastic. Now that is a challenge. When you go to any supermarket today, you see everything that is wrapped in plastic. Even things that don't need to be wrapped in plastic are wrapped in plastic. And even if you could buy stuff that wasn't wrapped in plastic, was plastic used in the production of that particular product? When that seed was grown, that tomato that you just ate, what contaminated the soil? How much plastic was in the soil? How much plastic was in the irrigation water? And how much plastic is left in the tomato as you eat it? So wherever possible, shop at local farmers markets because they tend to be organic, they tend to be grown locally, and they tend not to be over-packaged because you're not shipping over long distances. So buy local wherever possible. Do what I do. Make your own distilled water. This is a natural process. Basically what you do is that device on the left is a distiller. It's a big kettle. It boils the water, but in the top of the kettle there's a convection fan. The water condenses on the convection fan and it's pushed out through that little tube, and that tube goes into a glass container to store the water. So there is no plastic involved in that. What is that tube? The tube is made of silicone, and silicone is an elastomer, it's not a polymer. It doesn't contain carbon, so it's not a plastic. You can cook without Teflon. I just purchased one of these on the left. It's a ceramic electric griddle. It's purely ceramic. You don't even have to spray it with non-stick chemicals. It basically is a very clean working surface, and it doesn't leach any chemicals into the food. Use stainless steel or titanium cookware, and that will help. What you get when you put plastic in a microwave, you have no idea. The best thing to call it is chemical soup, and whatever you're eating is made of those chemicals that leached out of the plastic in the heating process. Use wooden cutting boards or glass cutting boards or granite cutting boards instead of plastic. Store your food in glass containers. Get rid of all your Tupperware. What you see there are glass containers with silicone lids. That again is perfectly clean, and no plastic, no chemicals will leach into your food. Go to local stores that offer refillable, reusable, responsible consumer products. So here's some examples. You can wear clothes made from natural fabrics. Natural fabrics are things like cotton, wool, linen, hemp, cashmere, silk, bamboo, all those things that come naturally. Avoid anything that is man-made or artificial, like polyester or lycra. All these things are very convenient, but they're full of plastic. Use a HEPA air filtration system. That's a high efficiency particulate air system. You can use that in your house. So here are some examples of those natural ingredients that I use. I use a bamboo toothbrush. I use organic toothpaste. It comes in a steel tube. Unfortunately, that steel tube is not refillable. I use biodegradable dental floss. It comes in a glass container. And I use natural shampoo, a soap bar for shampoo. So that eliminates a lot of bottles. We also use compostable bags instead of plastic bags. The Ziploc bags were very convenient, but they're not compostable. So these are compostable, resealable, they're biodegradable, and they do not contain plastic. Family went plastic free. You can read how they did it. It's in The Guardian. There's the article there, there's the website, and it took them 2 years to get there, but they did it. They became plastic free. So the question is for you, can you do it? Will you do it? And will you spread this message? Thank you very much. I'm Keith Launchbury, and that's the message for today.